All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So, obviously, welcome. Obviously, this is a hot button topic that we're going to be covering tonight. So, first off, I will say that 53,000 comments made an impact. I think, all in all, I do appreciate, and I think we do appreciate the FAA for, doing what a lot of people said that they wouldn't, and that's listen. Um, and I think that's very evident in the final rule document that they released. In fact, of the 400 and what 80 pages of the document, the first 420 of it is just responding to people's comments. So that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, so we
Uh,
could say if people really want to read the document, they could jump down to page 430 or so and get to the actual
rule, yeah,
regulation rules. The rest of it is
yeah,
just, justification and answering questions and whatnot.
yeah.
But if they jump down to page 435, then they'd miss the 15 references to FPV Freedom Coalition.
I was about to say
At
that.
least. And,
So,
and our new title.
Yeah, you caught that in the cybersecurity.
Oh, where they talked about us being pilots, or the one where they talked about us being acrobatic videographers?
Acrobatic videographer.
Yeah. Oh, there was also one typo on the name. That's why, because we were carrying 14, and then we realized there was a typo in FPVFC, so it looks like it's 15.
Oh, that's how you got 15.
Yep.
nice. All right. So, a big part of that is what they came out with. So, first and foremost, obviously, are going to be the effective dates. So, for us operators, once the rule is published within the Federal Register, we have a 60-day window plus 30 months before all this becomes effective, which basically means that we have that period of time to either comply with standard remote ID or broadcast module based remote ID, or no remote ID if you choose to fly in a FRIA, which is a great win for a lot of AMA pilots who have flown at those types of sites for a long time, are definitely comfortable flying in those types of conditions, and where they will not have to put remote ID on their aircraft. So, but I'm going to break this down a little further. Manufacturers, they have 60 days plus 18 months to comply. So that's approximately September 22nd or of 2022. And that basically means anybody who is producing an aircraft, a complete aircraft, and there's a fine distinction there. A complete aircraft will need to basically comply with standard remote ID.
So I have a little question about that.
Okay.
Can you produce an aircraft for flight inside, or can you produce an aircraft for flight only in a FRIA? Or can you produce an aircraft only for flight with a module?
So there's a couple different scenarios there. If you're producing, I don't know the answer on an aircraft for strictly indoor. I would have to kind of
You'd
think about
assume
that
that
one for
the
a
FAA
second.
has no jurisdiction there, so
Correct. So, whether they would get away with the labeling, for indoor use only, maybe, I'm not sure. Obviously there are, little micro drones and whatnot that we know of that do operate strictly indoor. In fact, the slightest gust of wind will send them flying. So, but on the flip side, in terms of producing them for broadcast only, yes, to a certain extent. So I'm going to use the biggest example that we've come across over the last couple of days, and that's going to be ready to flies. So companies like Get FPV, RDQ, Pyro Drone, they all produce, quote unquote, ready to fly drones where they build it, you buy it kind of situation. Now, if that aircraft is complete, and I do mean complete, so it's not missing a major component like motors or an RF receiver or a flight controller, something like that, if it's not missing that and it just comes straight out of the box ready to go, then it must comply with standard remote ID.
Even if you
Which
only
means it
ever
needs
plan to fly it at a FRIA?
Yes, I do believe so. David, are you on the same page with me on that?
I am. Yeah, if it comes as a fully equipped, it has to comply with the remote ID, and not only that, it has to comply with all the production requirements. So
Yeah, all the standard rules.
that's
Mhm.
yeah.
Someone else was
So-
trying to say something?
Yeah.
Maybe not.
So
right.
this is what Josh is saying is really important from a perspective of, so can I buy components and put it together myself? And the answer is, go
yeah.
ahead.
Absolutely, you can. And that falls under the conditions of what we are now calling home, or what the FAA is now calling home built unmanned aircraft. So basically, a home built unmanned aircraft is defined by the FAA as an unmanned aircraft that an individual built solely for education or recreation.
Right, I find that
a home-
interesting because you can't build your own for commercial use. Well, it's no longer considered home built.
Right.
Okay.
So a home built can only be used for education or for recreation.
Right.
So a
And
home built aircraft itself is not subject to the design or production requirements of the producer, that would be the manufacturer, as long as there is some level of assembly by the end user. So in an example that I wrote up today, so company A, let's say, could be Get FPV, provides a recreational ready to fly quadcopter that does not include an RF receiver in the package. Because the kit is incomplete, the company is not subject to the design or production requirements. Because a quadcopter was built for either education or recreation, the end user is also not subject to design or production requirements. The operator is, however, required to comply with remote IDs, or with remote ID rules. Okay, so
how would
ahead.
this affect someone like, say, Joshua Bardwell? They send him a kit for him to put together, fly outside, and review as a Part 107 pilot for his YouTube channel. That's no longer possible?
So no, well, it needs to be essentially missing a major component for it to not have to comply with standard remote ID. So, so in the kit, let's say as an example, the kit you buy is missing that RF receiver. So your controller, your transmitter receiver. So my recommendation to companies like Pyrodrone and Get FPV and RDQ and so on and so forth is like on those pages where you purchase the ready to fly, a lot of them have a pick your receiver kind of option that needs to
Right.
go away.
But then,
And
if you're doing a home build, you can't use it for Part 107 anymore.
you
you can with a
you
broadcast
can with
module.
with a broadcast module.
But then it doesn't count as home built anymore. But
Right.
anyway, I'm sorry, I'm sort of getting us off topic.
No, this is important. This is important. And
It
so
is.
if you have an existing drone, so we've got a couple of us have more than two, then you just put your single broadcast module on it, and you can fly that under Part 107.
Yeah, I would
All right.
agree that that's the intent of the module, is you can retrofit and you can make a home built able to meet the regulations.
Yeah.
And actually, if you look in the rules, they don't ever actually talk about home built. It's just in the explanation section up above. They define what home built is and so on and so forth. But
So in
the
the
rules
rule, they just
themselves-
We got 2
mention.
years.
Yeah, in the rules they just mention there's an exemption.
So we got 2 years. Remote IDs are implemented.
2.5, 30.
roughly September 2023 before operators have to comply with it. Yeah.
And text chat will, that's what tonight is for. If you think that we're wrong on a point, we're welcoming to
Absolutely.
be challenged. We did cross these T's and dots a fair number of I's to get to this.
Yeah, but at the same time, we're only people and we make mistakes, and there's been a couple
Yeah.
scenarios already where we have missed something that was right in front of our face, and it changed the entire definition of a
And
couple.
I would also say the rules are not necessarily so clear cut that even reading them would give you the right answer.
Yeah, there's a couple where it's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
All right, so standard remote ID. Let's talk about that for a second. So, in the documents that we're creating, we're kind of creating acronyms for some of these. So, standard remote ID is becoming SRID or SRID. I'm not going to call it SRID. It's just going to be SRID. Those remote IDs. So, when these manufacturers are producing an aircraft with standard
Hey.
remote ID, it needs to be integrated.
Hey, Josh.
Yeah.
Peter FPV, your mic is open. Could you go on mute, please? Thanks, Josh.
Yeah. So standard remote ID needs to be integrated into the UAS system. Now, there's a fine distinction between a UAS and an unmanned aircraft. So a UAS is the complete system. So that would be the vehicle and the control station. It needs to operate from takeoff to shutdown, and the operator must land as soon as practical if the remote ID stops broadcasting. There's certain messages that needs to be broadcast from the remote ID, and that's going to be the identity of the aircraft, which would either be a serial number or a session ID. It needs to broadcast the latitude, longitude, and geometric altitude of the control station.
And that's
It
something
also
a
needs
lot of people are not going to be thrilled with.
Yes. So essentially, with that, it will broadcast the location of where you are at. Second to that is the latitude, longitude, geometric altitude, and the velocity of the unmanned aircraft, as well as a time mark identifying each individual message and the emergency status of the unmanned aircraft. It needs to have a self-test function, which operates both prior to takeoff as well as during flight. So prior to takeoff, if the RID functionality is not there, then the aircraft is not able to take off, and then it must continually monitor the remote ID functionality and let the person in control know if it stops working. So there's a lot there. And again, the standard remote ID, the key point here is that it's integrated into the system of the aircraft as well as the control station. It needs to be able to stop the unmanned aircraft from taking flight, which means it's kind of a pass, no pass kind of situation, and it's actually embedded into the firmware.
So I want to jump in
Or
here real quick and just
feasibly.
mention
Go ahead.
for some people who are asking about this, like having GPS in your transmitter. So we're talking right now about the standard remote ID, which is buying a drone that comes pre-built to comply with all the regulations.
So think
When
about
you add a
from this
module, it's
perspective.
different.
Yeah, so think about it from this perspective. You buy a DJI drone that's set, ready to go. It would include, or it should include, standard remote ID. All that stuff would be embedded into the ecosystem that DJI creates around that drone. So, as an example, Dan, and I'm sure some of you probably fly the DJI system, which or the DJI HD FPV system. That creates an ecosystem between the air unit, the goggles, and the transmitter if you're using that. So all that would be interconnected, and it would be the same thing on something like a Mavic or an Inspire or something like that you get from DJI.
Yeah, and in those cases, I guess the control station would have to have GPS in it to send it to the drone so that the drone could put it in its broadcast message.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is something that the remote ID module that you add to a home-built drone does not need to do.
Correct. So, any questions so far on the standard remote ID beyond that? Let's see. Do we know if the standard RID is going to be encrypted or is it open to the public? Okay, so the messaging itself is going to be open to the public. So it needs to be able to be broadcast on a compatible frequency, or on a frequency that's compatible with personal wireless devices. Personal wireless devices would be things like your iPhone, your Android. Think about, and this is the example they give in the document, think about Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. Um, so it would be able to be picked up by those devices, and those messages would not be encrypted. The one thing that would be kind of not encrypted, but kind of hidden behind the wall would be your session ID or your serial number. The individual, like let's say you got Joe Schmo down the street, he picks up on his iPhone that you are flying. He's not going to be able to get access to the database with your personal information that you submit to the FAA, like your address, your name, your phone number, all that kind of stuff.
Correct.
But
They'll just
for-
get like a serial number. They won't know who you are, but they'll know everything else about where you are and what you're flying and where it's going.
Correct. Yes.
Right, so to TB's question, the answer is yes. You would, the public would have access to our telemetry of the aircraft.
The idea is from the FAA is they want, if somebody's out in a park flying a drone and somebody else doesn't like it, they want that person to be able to bring out their cell phone, look at it and say, hey, this person standing over there is flying a drone and I want to report them.
Right.
And to TextCheck's question, can they use this information to look you up?
No.
The answer to that is no. And interesting, that's different from general aviation where you can. And so in this instance, you use your registration number or a serial number or a session. So they are thinking about that they will anonymize what's coming down. And the FAA will carry the personal information link, and that will be restricted to law enforcement.
To Wash Bucket's question, how will a phone receive an RID signal? I would imagine that it would come through via an app, whether that's third party or first party. It needs to be readily accessible by anybody. So the question would be if DJI creates their own app to read their own specific information, or if it's just going to be a general app where all that information can be come down. I would imagine the FAA would push for a general app as opposed to a proprietary app.
I assume that they're going to request that everyone making remote ID devices comply to an ASTM standard
Yes.
for how the messages are transmitted, and then any app that can read that standard should be able to display the information.
And I would imagine apps like Kitty Hawk and maybe UAS Sidekick might integrate this kind of information into their existing apps.
Yeah, Wash Bucket,
Bucket.
they expect the signal to go far enough for people to get them. That remains to be seen.
So Bluetooth, depending on the version of Bluetooth, I think there's Bluetooth 5 has a long range functionality on it that I think Dave was saying goes up to like a couple of miles.
Yeah, and so good news to me is this is not 25 miles away.
So if I'm out in the middle of nowhere flying and I have my standard remote ID aircraft, can I still fly even if that... I was under the impression I can still fly even if that remote ID signal is not picked up somewhere, as long as it's still being transmitted.
Correct.
To be able to be picked up, I can still fly.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, critically important point. And that's why, while our heads are exploding a little bit trying to understand this, we are ecstatic that there's not a network requirement. You don't have to connect to the internet to take off. You don't have to show where you are. So, yes. So as long as you're broadcasting, we're good to go.
Yeah, and that's one of the key things that they did remove is that network capability. So there's no data plan that you need. You don't have to send any information to a unmanned service supplier, anything like that. It's literally over the air broadcast, just like an FPV signal, just like your RF signal. It's just a different type of signal that will be coming off your aircraft.
At this time, which I believe is mentioned quite a few times in the document.
So TB, there is no data that's stored as long as somebody doesn't, basically capture it via a screenshot or anything on their phone. There's nothing to be uploaded. It's literally an over-the-air broadcast. It goes the same place your FPV feed goes. It just goes off into the ether.
Yeah, like if you felt like it, you could stick an antenna on your roof and just constantly record remote ID broadcast if you wanted to.
So, TextJet, I've had that same question on how the Bluetooth pairing will work. That depends.
I don't
I don't
imagine
know
there's
if
any pairing necessary. It's
I
it's
think
a
it's just going to be
receive
a
only broadcast signal.
yeah. All right. So, uh, let's see.
Yeah,
Any
where
other
were we?
questions that I missed? We're kind of wrapping up standard remote ID. So, um, essentially, there's a couple, accuracy issues, or accuracy requirements, I should say. So basically, that the latitude and longitude, the altitude is all accurate within a certain amount, within a certain probability, and that's the same for both standard remote ID and broadcast modules. So moving on, we're going to talk about the broadcast modules. So this is something we really push for, and I know a couple other organizations really push for. We all knew remote ID was coming. We all knew that based on the NPRM that it was going to be pretty rough if we went the route that the FAA originally decided to go. So one of the things we did push for was an add-on module. So what this does is it makes it so that the entire United States fleet of drones, whether it's a DJI, whether it's the one in your garage that you fly with on a weekend, they would all become obsolete if the NPRM stayed the way it was. With the addition of a broadcast module, it's an add-on component, just like a VTX or something similar that you would put onto your drone. It basically gives you the ability to comply with remote ID. So it's an upgrade kind of thing to make sure you're compliant and that you're staying within the rules. So it basically has the same requirements as the standard remote ID, with the exceptions of a couple of things. So the module will not be integrated into the unmanned aircraft system. So the module is just a add-on component. It just broadcasts. It will not be integrated into your flight controller. It will not restrict takeoff. The operator themselves is responsible for not initiating takeoff if the module is not functional or not broadcasting. The serial number requirement, before, the serial number would be the serial number of the aircraft, whereas here it would be the serial number of the module. It's not integrated to the control station, so it's not required to report the location of the operator. It is required to report the location of the takeoff. So when you take off, it stores that information and it broadcasts that repeatedly along with the rest of the other messages. The other big difference is that with a broadcast module, the FAA has stipulated that the person operating the unmanned aircraft must be able to see the unmanned aircraft at all times throughout. This is a point of contention right now, and something that we are following up on. The way it's worded here is that the actual person flying has to be able to see it, and that would mean essentially that FPV is not allowed because they don't mention anything about a visual observer or if a visual observer can satisfy the requirement. Now, there's a couple people in two different camps. One camp basically says this nullifies FPV. Another camp says, well, there's other statements in the document saying they're not defining visual line of sight in this document. So the old standard where a visual observer would satisfy this is still valid.
And I would
We are
argue it
looking to
doesn't actually say visual line of sight in this sentence, so it doesn't
right.
matter.
Absolutely. So it's something that we are going to clarify with the FAA. We are going to talk with them and see if the language can be adjusted, or if we can get some clarification on the intent here.
Yeah,
So
they really are not intending to block FPV. Hopefully they can change this to include something to say that you can have a visual observer be able to see it for you.
right.
Otherwise,
So
can you imagine, like, if the local law enforcement are actually versed in the regulations and they read that sentence and saw you flying FPV, what would they think?
Right, exactly. So, TextJet, how many people have an observer available? Well, the question would be, you're already required to have a visual observer if you're flying FPV. So there's that. So nothing is essentially has really changed. We just don't know if the language is the right language that they need to be using.
Like
So
Bruce Simpson, we all have the Terminator at our side watching our flights for us.
yes. So the broadcast module itself, which Dave and I talked. Originally, I was calling it the BMRID. I've just changed it to Module Remote ID.
Thank you.
So MRID. So it's a definite step in the right direction. It definitely makes it a little more feasible for the hobbyists to comply with remote ID. Now, the FAA is estimating somewhere between $20 and $50 for a remote ID module. That remains to be seen, but this is going to be one of those things where it's kind of like your goggles or your transmitter. You're going to buy it once, you're going to buy one, and you're going to use it on all your aircraft. You can swap it between aircraft. It's not tied to a specific aircraft, and you can swap it at will.
I'll be curious to see how that all works out, because, like, if you think about it, it says it has to notify the operator if it's malfunctioning or not working. So imagine in an FPV drone, maybe something in your OSD has to let you know that your module is not working. So it's more than just a complete standalone module. It has to be integrated into or talking to the flight controller in some way.
Well, it could be something where it comes over like the S port on your transmitter as well. So like if you've got FR SkyTech, you've got the S port where you can download your telemetry to your radio, so that could give you feedback as well. It could be something like on a beeper. It could be a couple of different options.
Yeah, curious to see how people will implement that.
Yeah. All right. And then lastly, the third is no remote ID. So there are those who feel like they don't want to use remote ID or are comfortable flying at a designated flying site. So if you have no remote ID, you are restricted to flying in a FAA recognized identification area or a FRIA. And the person, that same sentence from the broadcast module is also present in the no remote ID. The person operating the unmanned aircraft must be able to see the unmanned aircraft at all times throughout the operation. Again, something that we will seek to clarify.
Correct. Because if that means there's no FPV even at a FRIA, that would mean huge consequences for, say, multi-GP races at an AMA field.
Correct. All right. So let's move on to before I do that, any questions on the broadcast module or no remote ID?
Several people are typing.
Yeah, I see that. Okay. All right. So seems like we're doing okay. All right. So FRIAs, yes, you guys are correct. Only a community-based organization or an educational institution can apply for a FRIA. So community-based organizations, that hasn't technically been defined yet, but an organization such as the AMA or such as ourselves, and there are several others out there that are seeking to become CBOs. If they do become CBOs, then they would be able to apply for FRIA status for certain areas. Also, educational institutions, and very key here is that every type of educational institution, whether it's a primary or secondary school, trade schools, or college or university, could apply for a FRIA. This is fantastic because this allows for STEM to continue to thrive.
Yeah, I could
Um,
imagine hopefully some schools will get together and be able to submit to the FAA and say, yeah, our football field, whatever, is a FRIA, and when we do our STEM classes and our little drones outside there, they can fly there.
Correct, which is awesome. So if you apply, if a CBO or a school applies for FRIA and is approved, it's recognized for 48 calendar months, so a 4 year. The one big change in the FRIA kind of situation is originally there was going to be a 12-month period in which anybody could, or the designated people could apply for a FRIA. And then after that, they would accept no more applications. That's gone now because the FAA has recognized that FRIAs are always going to have a place, whether it's for STEM or whether it's for people who cannot put remote ID. There are certain aircraft that would not take a remote ID. Um, so, things like gliders that operate on minimal battery power, just for servos and stuff like that. Um, so FRIAs are going to be an indefinite thing at this point, and I will stress at this point. FRIAs can be renewed. You need to submit for renewal at least 120 days before expiration. Um, and In order to terminate the individual who applied can terminate the FRIA, or the FAA can terminate the FRIA if it poses a risk to safety or national security. And a couple other reasons if you supplied false information or like that.
And getting
All
to
right.
TB's question there, yes, people, there's a time frame where it's good for, and then once they expire, they have to reapply for a FRIA, but they can keep it going indefinitely as long as they keep reapplying and as long as the FAA keeps agreeing to it.
Approving it. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Spotter important. FAA said that would make the RID rule. Good that FAA backed off things, but the rest of what's left just sucks. I mean, it's definitely a massive back off, I would say, TextJet. I would say I think it's better than anybody thought it would be.
Except for
but
what
it
the
was
administrator told the kids in that live chat.
all right. Let's see. Okay, so all right. More questions on FRIAs? I'm trying to get through as much of this as I can.
I want to
still
find the
answer
first
everybody's
person who makes their backyard a FRIA.
Well, they'd have to have a CBO do it, so I'm sure somebody will do it.
If only
All right.
the FPVFC could say every member's backyard is a FRIA location.
Right. All right, so registration. So this was another big contentious issue within the NPRM. So registration will now be the same as it is today with one little change. So registration for recreational is going to continue to be on a per operator or per pilot basis. So you pay your $5. It's good for 3 years. You give them your information. You no longer need to. Originally, the ask from the FAA and the NPRM was that even recreational would pay on a per uh, uh, unmanned aircraft basis, so $5 per aircraft. So they went away with that. So now it's still staying the same. $5 for the operator. You get your little FAA certificate that gives you your number that you put on your aircraft. The only change is if you're flying a standard remote ID aircraft, the serial number issued by the manufacturer needs to be input into that, and you need to keep it up to date. So, and that serial number is valid for only one registration. So, let's say if a father and a son are both flying the same drone, that particular drone can only be that serial number can only be keyed under one registration. Okay, so technically it would belong to one of them, and technically. I don't know how that would fall on if the other individual could take it out and fly it. I would imagine that they would be responsible. Right. And then registry. Oh, and then if you have a module, remote ID module, the serial number issued by the manufacturer needs to be submitted. So, and if you have multiple modules, if you're, feeling a little spicy and you want to have a module for each of your UASs, you will input all of those, not just one if you have.
Yeah, so I would expect in the coming years on the FAA's Drone Zone website where you go to register, there'll be a new area for recreational pilots to be able to enter all this new information, well, the serial numbers of the modules they're asking for.
Yes. Okay. So let me catch up on questions here. Does a FRIA need to be private property? I know of a dry lake that is a popular spot to fly here. So one of the things that you would do, Wash Bucket, would probably be partnering with whoever technically oversees that land to see if you could, if basically they would give permission to allow you to apply for a FRIA, in which case, they may want to be the point of contact for that, or they may designate you as the point of contact for that. But you would enter in that conversation with the people who actually oversee that land or own that land. Let's see. So if a city provided a flying field with no club affiliation, I guess they will have to get, yes. So you would have to affiliate with a CBO or an educational institution to apply for it. Let's see. Is the FPVFC still in the process of being accepted as a CBO? So that is a goal. Yes, that is our goal. However, the FAA has not released on how we become a CBO. They have released some guidelines into what a CBO must entail, and we've jumped through those hoops. However, there's no way to apply to become a CBO at the current time. Let's see. I wonder if there'll be a limit on how many FRIAs a single CBO can register. So somebody like the AMA, Dave, do you know how many fields the
He just
CBO?
posted it.
Oh, 2,600 flying sites. So I would imagine that no,
It's got to be at
not a
least big
limit.
enough for that.
Yeah. All right. So registration for Part 107 will also stay the same as it is. It would be $5 per aircraft that would be flown under Part 107 conditions or rules.
There is a change to the recurrency exam for the 107 in the
There is,
operations.
yes.
So
Yeah, for
that's
night
awesome.
operations, yeah.
But I do
Well,
just want
if
to
you- yeah, just for, if you want if I understood it correctly, if you get your recurrency, you could get it online and it's free, as opposed to whatever the fee was, plus every 24 months you have to go in person to take a test. Did I follow that one right?
So yeah, I believe that once the test is updated to include flying over people and night flying, that once they integrate those questions, that everybody will be required to take a recurrency. It won't wait until you are up for your 24 months. So once that's applied, everybody will be required, and it will be free for the recurrency, not to take the initial, but for the recurrent.
So one thing I do want to stress that a lot of people seem to get wrong is that if you're a Part 107 pilot doing an operation under Part 107, all of your drones need to be registered, no matter how light they are. If you have a 1 gram drone and you're flying it, it still needs to be registered. And if it needs to be registered, it needs remote ID.
Correct. So let's see. No. Okay, Dave, you got that one. AMA sites are not automatically. They will have to apply and be approved.
Yeah, and I assume the AMA will have a process for that, so that each little group might submit for each of their flying sites, or however that will work.
Yeah.
Yeah, the AMA is going to be a clearinghouse.
So John CC, so a tiny whoop needs to be registered if you. Yep, absolutely.
If you fly it
sure
outside.
does. And if you're using it for commerce. All right. So couple of
Yeah.
things that are not in my notes, but I do want to touch on. So big question: who's going to produce the RID modules? The answer to that is we don't know. So basically the 30 months is time for somebody to produce a remote ID module. Now, the opposition to that is manufacturers only have 18 months to start to integrate standard remote ID into their aircrafts. Could it be that one of our hobby or companies create a remote ID module? Absolutely. But I would imagine there's going to be some significant R&D, research and development costs associated with that, as well as going through the process with the FAA to get those approved, and they do need to be approved. It goes through a means of compliance test, which basically, if I were to create one, I would have to submit all the information, how it works, and basically prove that it's able to meet the minimum requirements, and then provide testing and validation, and so on and so forth. So
One thing I find kind of funny is that doesn't it say that you cannot begin creating a remote ID module for 18 months or something? Like,
no, I didn't hear that. I didn't see that.
why is there a lower limit on, like, I understand the FAA is not going to start approving them right away, but there was some
Right.
like time frame of you can't create one yet because we're not
Oh,
ready.
you're gonna have to point that out to me because I didn't see that in there.
I'm pretty sure that's in one of the dates somewhere.
That's funny. All right, so overall, it doesn't beat us up too bad. I don't think that any of this is completely over the top. I think that it provides a path for remote ID to be common sense and to be complied with. Does it add a little extra burden? Yes. Are you gonna have to think a little bit harder when you go out to fly and make sure that your equipment's working the way it should? Yes, you should be doing that already though. But I don't think, as long as the remote ID modules are not overly expensive,
Or gigantic.
then or gigantic or weigh a bunch, I think we're going to be fine.
Yeah, some of as we go through and look back, do the summary of what changed is, for the better, is that network they got rid of, so it's just broadcast. The module is really important for being able to retrofit existing drones. Home built was expanded, so that it's easier for us to build and fly with components. The FRIAs were expanded, so we're not trying to simply say, oh, everything's great, but in comparison to the NPRM, this is, as Josh said earlier, this is better than we anticipated.
Absolutely. All right, so I'm going to open the floor up to any questions on anything remote ID.
Yeah, good question, Alex. What if no one makes a module? What if there's like no incentive for people to make one? And if they all pour their development into making a standard compliant drone, why would you make a module?
The aspiring electrical engineer has that question.
Yep, right. Alex, get on it, bro.
And we want to swing back. We want to swing back on that FPV.
I'll ask my professors.
What was that? Sorry.
He'll ask his professors.
Oh, there you go. Be careful working on it at school because the intellectual property will become the property of the school.
Yeah.
So that FPV point that Josh mentioned earlier, that has us concerned, and hopefully we're just being a little paranoid, but we will be looking into that. Every little bit counts.
All right. So, has there been any word of the editing part 107 exam to include RID soon? I'm starting to get mine. I wonder if I should be prepared for a new set of questions. I haven't seen them state that they're going to update it for remote ID. I would imagine when they update it for flight over people and night operations that they will probably update it with remote ID as well. But I haven't seen any documents stating that.
Yeah, they definitely said they were going to add the night operation stuff as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And then flight over
Any
people.
word if RDQ will continue with their lawsuit? That I'm not sure of. I mean, my particular take and our particular take at this point, with the exception of the issue with the visual observer, I don't see a whole lot that would need to be litigated.
I have not seen Race Day Quad say anything publicly at all, I guess, about either way. I don't know if anyone
Yeah.
else has noticed anything, so I assume they're still planning for it, but I have not seen them mention anything yet.
Yeah, and we're having the good news is you've seen. Well, I don't know if yeah, we did. We thanks to Dan, it's out there. We have endorsements now from a number of the retailers, from Road Riot, from Get FPV,
Pyro,
from Pyro Drone, Gilly Nation, as well as Race Day Quad, and so we're talking to each of these folks and. With respect to the litigation, personally, I'm with Josh. It's like we look through what was produced in the final rule, and what would be what's to litigate against, and the FAA I think did a very credible job of going through the 53,000 some odd comments, and then as we said, spending 200 pages in the final rule. Much larger case for standard RD broadcasting. Pilot's location is going to be a point. Yeah, that could be a contention. Yes, that's one that, and so, what's the what's the point of litigation? Is it privacy? Asking an aircraft to broadcast the things that they're asking are there's absolutely an analog in general aviation with ADS-B. So this is 10 years in the making, and ADS-B 2020 50 is, I think it's now up to 70 some odd % of manned aircraft have ADS-B out.
Replying to text,
DJI,
has DJI said anything? I have not heard anything yet, but I hope Brendan posts some blog like he has in the past. That would be great.
Usually Brendan's really good at blasting that stuff out.
Yeah, and I can tell you they're very happy with the network versus broadcast. They this is to evidence how the DJI team really is. They are consumer thoughtful, and so they were very worried that the network would create yet another cell phone charge for anyone who wants to fly a drone, and that's off the table. So I know they're very happy about that, and so are we.
Yep.
ADS-B is not required for uncontrolled airspace. So that's correct. No, you're correct.
Yep. Rise, Dave, on Rise's note on the Amazon Smile, we may need to contact Amazon and get recognized as give them our 501c3 document.
Yes, and Rise, if you would send me an email on that so that I can track that.
I want to click on that little blue words where it says "Why $0?"
And Rise, we really do appreciate that.
Emailing now. Why is my turn? Okay, this is good. Yeah, and so interestingly, there was a similar thing from Google, and it was they had a clearinghouse called Benivity. So we've gone through some of these processes. So thank you, and we'll follow up on it.
Yeah, Amazon Smile is not one I thought of when we needed to set things up. So, yeah. All right. Any other questions on remote ID? I see people are typing.
Hey, Kojo.
Yeah.
Hey, man. So for part 107, you just because I came in a little late, so you said that it's night and flying over people, and they say vehicles as well. Part of that.
So there is information in the document on flying over vehicles as well. It needs to be, and this is me rough paraphrasing because I glanced at the document. I haven't gone in depth. So I do believe it needs to be on a closed course, close to the public, and everybody that is within the closed area needs to be aware that there is a drone flying over the vehicle.
It also said you could transit across vehicles. So I think you could like go across a highway, but you can't maintain flight over a vehicle for long periods of time or something.
Yeah.
And
So
for clarity, what we're talking about is a separate rule. So this is the UAS operations over flight, which includes night flight. And so this is separate from the remote identification final
Yeah.
rule.
So
Go ahead.
So does it? So So I heard you say that they're going to add for at least the night portion an additional training. I'm assuming it's like a training module that you have to go do. That's added on to your Part 107 recurrency. Is that right?
yeah,
That's
it's question. They're adding questions to the recurrency exam. Yes.
The exam.
That's exactly right.
And so whenever that comes out, we don't know when that's going to be yet, right? We have to go, even if your Part 107 hasn't expired yet, you still have to go and renew it, the
Yes.
test.
Yeah, and it will be free though, according to the document.
The first time or every time?
No, the first time. Once they add the questions, they will require a recurrency.
Is it just night questions, or is it going to also be flying over people and vehicles questions?
I don't have an answer to that. Again, I haven't deep dove into the document yet. Okay, I can send you a link to the document if that will.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Yeah, and this one, and the flying over people and flying at night to me was like, oh boy.
Yeah.
It'll take everyone. First you have to have your Part 107, and that's good. And we were talking a little earlier. Yeah, it's a good idea to get your 107. Okay, so you all right. Either have it or I'm thinking about getting my Part 107. Then you look down Category 1, Category 2, Category 3, Category 4, new category. So this is similar to what was put out last year in the NPRM for flight over people or operations over people. And this brings out the, let's see, is it 11 and 25 foot-pounds of kinetic energy? So for the engineers in the community, you can calculate that a 4 or 5 inch drone can fly about 10 miles an hour and manage under the lower kinetic energy thresholds. So this is, our heads, drop a little and go, oh my gosh. So this one is going, this is a lot. And so if this is an area that you're really interested in, these are a lot of regulations. However, if you have a parachute, you might be able to get it done. And that's, sounds a little tongue in cheek, but that in fact could be a way through this to make to satisfy the requirements in the categories.
I know there are a lot of people that are bummed because they think part of that rule for flying over people says that if it's under 250 grams, you can fly over people, but it has to have prop guards. So if you take a Mavic Mini that's 249 grams and add prop guards to it, now it's over 250, and so you can't fly over people anymore.
Exactly. Yeah, and then it as you read through carefully with the category 1, 2, 3, etc. I think category 2, 3, and 4 all have to be standard or broadcast module, so they have to comply with remote identification.
To answer the real Jonathan Frank's question, will the module cause interference because it's on 2.4 or 5.8 gigahertz? The rule says it can't cause interference and it can't be interfered with. So they've got it all figured out. The rule says it can't. So therefore it won't.
There will be we declare there will be no electromagnetic radiation.
I think that will be a very difficult thing to accomplish, but maybe possible.
So to answer TextJet's question or statement, remote pilots in command who wish to conduct small unmanned aircraft operations at night must complete either the updated initial test or the updated recurrent online training prior to conducting. And then I do believe knowledge test change updates the initial remote pilot knowledge test to include night subject areas. Additionally, the final rule replaces the requirement to complete an in-person recurrent test every 24 calendar months. The updated requirement is for remote pilots to complete online recurrent training, which will include night subject areas. The online recurrent training will be offered free of charge to remote pilots. So the training, not the test. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. I am so sorry.
Hey, for the night stuff, is it like at any time of the night? Because before it used to be, they used to have weird rules on,
30
twilight,
minutes plus or minus
whatever.
twilight.
Is it like all night flight now? Like, is there a limitation on when?
There appears to be no, yep, yep, Alex has beat me to it.
I think they're
Anytime.
trying to come up to be more parity with recreational flight, which has no limits on night flying.
Yeah.
Okay, do you still have to have anti-collision lights and a specific type of
Yes.
lighting?
Yes.
Correct. 3 nautical mile vision as well as
3
blinking
statute
lights.
mile. Statute mile.
Statute. Thank you.
So they just basically ease the waiver requirement. Basically, that's gone now. The waiver.
Yeah.
That's correct.
And same thing over flying over people and vehicles. That waiver requirement is gone as long as you have what on the drone. Like, what does the drone have to have?
So it says must be category 1, category 2, or category 3 eligible to operate over people, may not maintain sustained flight over moving vehicles, transit operations only. For an operation under category 1, category 2, or category 3, the small unmanned aircraft throughout the operation must remain within or over a closed or restricted access site. And all human beings located inside a moving vehicle within the closed restricted access site must be on notice that a small unmanned aircraft may fly over them.
Right.
What's the
So
definition of
get
a closed restricted access site?
Uh,
a barn with no walls.
Or
I would
a
imagine
drift
it would be
course,
something that the general public does not have access
a
to.
closed set for a Hollywood movie.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Must
Yeah,
not maintain.
But take a look at these because this category 2 is let's see, it has to have the
Yeah, there's some major
11 foot-pound
restrictions.
threshold plus RID, and it also has to have the production requirements. So that's the one where it's like, okay, can't build this one myself. Category
Can't have
3,
any exposed rotating parts.
right. So yeah, thank you. No, it can't lacerate you with so shrouded props. Category 3, same rules as category 2, but they increase the kinetic energy requirements, and then category 4 is Part 21. So they treat it like a full-size aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
Part, you mean 91, right?
No,
I
part
did not.
21.
Remind me, what's part 21?
It's the manufacturing requirements for
For like
a general
Cessna and Piper and stuff. Okay,
Uh-huh.
gotcha.
You
So
basically have to have maintenance,
log.
preventative maintenance, alterations, all need to be documented.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Only
Do they
the
talk about-
certified mechanic changes it, etc.
Did they talk about I know you guys mentioned like FRIAs or like being like, I know the AMA sites are getting, approval to be able to do things at their sites, right? But like, what about like they don't allow Part 107 operations at AMA locations. So how do I get around? Like, can we apply for that? Like, my organization apply for a specific location to do this, or
Only if you're a community-based organization or an educational institution. Only
interesting.
those two can apply for a FRIA site.
And we, as we've mentioned, FPVFC are, that's one of the things when we formed. Why did we immediately become a 501c3? Because in order to become a CBO, you had to be a 501c3. You had to have a set of safety guidelines. You had to have a mission that was helping aeronautical and education, and a couple other requirements. And I think we've touched and checked the box for each of the requirements.
Nico, when do we expect clarification from the FAA about FPV and the visual observer? We have
Hopefully,
and
hopefully
next,
next week.
Yeah. So we are all over that. Obviously, that's a big deal to FPV pilots. So that's going to be a key.
As an overall shout out to the work that this team, the FPVFC team, has done, is that there are a number of folks in the manned aviation community, the unmanned aviation community, associations that are helping us out right now. And as you can see, our name really, I mean, we joked about it, but we're quite proud that we got 15 mentions in the remote ID. We are being taken seriously by the FAA. So
yeah,
this is positive.
I think my hands went in the air when we discovered how many references to us there were. So I'm very proud. I think I think the team has done great work thus far, and we're just going to keep pushing that.
It wasn't just the FPVFC; it was the members of the FPVFC.
Absolutely.
They got called out directly as well.
Yes. Yeah, it was great. I love
So
that.
anybody that used our write-up for a response to the NPRM, thank you.
Yeah, and as Alex says, 90 of our members that submitted it, like back in January, February last year, that was a significant portion of our members.
Yeah, it was. And then even beyond that, there were 750, I believe, ish mentions of the FPVFC in the comments. We ran
Right.
searches through it just
Right.
to kind of garner our impact. Not only that, but the write-up that we did inspired a lot of our partner organizations to draw some of the same conclusions and submit a lot of the same comments. So the more unified we were in our comments, the bigger the impact. And I think that's definitely seen in the response. Well, thank you, Nico. I appreciate that.
Fun.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Anything we need to clarify? Anything that you feel we got wrong?
Earlier in the meeting, I just wanted to comment on the part where we were talking about the production requirements for indoor UAS and how some thought it would be limited and some thought it wouldn't. On page 218 of the remote ID document, the FAA, where the FAA is replying to the comments proposed saying that this would happen for it would prohibit manufacturing of indoor UAS. It says that the agency regulates aircraft operated in the navigable airspace of the United States, not unmanned aircraft operations conducted indoors. And as indicated in 89501, the production requirements apply to unmanned aircraft with remote identification operated in the airspace of the United States. So basically saying that it shouldn't, the FAA doesn't believe that it should interfere with production of indoor UAS.
So all the Chinese companies are going to put for indoor use only on their drones when they send them over.
Well, hey, you got that ring camera that floats around your house too. So
yeah. So
any mention of the protest? No. Good question. There was, and so if someone's not looking at the screen, the question is: was there any mention of the protest or a way to measure its impact? There was not. I can tell you, I was February 27, and I was presenting to the FAA at one of the last acts, and they closed the FAA offices in response. So we definitely got their attention.
Yeah, I would say so. And I mean, I would say the protest had a measurable effect in regards to, in combination with the 53,000 comments that were sent in.
Right. And
I think all in all, it was.
And if you walked around and you looked at the videos of the protest, it was productive, peaceful, respectful, and
clean.
And clean and diverse. And that's that helps us push all the notions of, hey, this is really important for STEM, as well as these people are using FPV not only for recreation but for helping themselves if it's PTSD or chronic pain, things like that. So very good message.
Absolutely. Well, hey, make the aircraft for the rest of the world too, so RID doesn't have to. Some manufacturers could leave the U.S. market if they can't afford double the model types. So I don't see. I would say that they're going to produce one for. I think you're going with indoor use versus outdoor use, TextJet. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think he's trying to say remote ID may be different around the world, so they wouldn't want like a model for the U.S., a model for Australia, a model for Africa.
You're probably correct on that, but the other thing I would state is that generally the rest of the world follows the type of regulations that the U.S. puts in place.
So TextJet, Europe has remote ID rules that are taking effect, I think, starting next week or something, at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
And they're actually very similar to these rules where it's a broadcast kind of thing. So if the standard is very similar, they could probably make the same drone follow it.
Right. And the standard that's being followed is the ASTM F-34 committee, which is an international standard. It's remote identification and tracking standard.
And I would also posit that, these types of regulations are probably in talks in a lot of different European Union countries, as well as other countries around the world. Keep in mind that UAS is a relatively new technology and people are struggling to catch up to it. So I would imagine over the next couple of years, you're going to see the same thing.
So it's an interesting thought in terms of, well, I wouldn't want to be a manufacturer right now. However, there are a couple of military UAS manufacturers that we know of. And wouldn't it be cool that all of a sudden you can have a much larger base to amortize your chipset against? So, companies are doing, or it's in production today, and this is putting chipsets, into a package and changing the software. And I'm from Global Tech, so I don't trivialize what that means, but it is also an opportunity.
Yeah. Imagine being the first organization or company to roll out with a remote ID module. Like, that's going to be the company that gets a jump start. So, can RTFs still be produced without RID? So, yes,
Good question.
RTFs
Really
can
good question.
RTFs can be produced. However, so I gave this example earlier. Let's say Pyrodrone has an RTF that they want to sell. In order for it to fall under the home built category, it needs to be missing a major part. And the easiest major missing part that is customizable between users would be the RF receiver. So basically, as long as it's missing that part and you have to purchase it separately or as a different line item on the invoice, I would posit that it will be classified as a home built because you will have to install that major missing component.
What if it doesn't come with props and you have to put on your own props?
Okay, so props is not a major missing component.
Well, you can't fly
but
without
motors would be. But motors would be.
So we can, if you're missing a receiver, we would consider that an RTF. I mean, in the
well,
RC
that's not
model,
a ready to fly. That would be an
ARF.
Well, yeah, I guess that would
Almost ready to fly.
ARF.
Bind and fly.
Yeah.
Bind and fly would have the receiver.
Right.
So, the old wording was that it needed to be 50% assembled by the end user. That language is now gone, right?
Gone.
It's now as long as there is some level of assembly required.
And from a component perspective, that's a big deal that they tossed out that 50%.
Yeah.
That had me nervous that what was happening is they were creeping up on this part 21 so that they would just, they weren't going to eliminate hobbyists being able to build their own UAS, and that's gone. So that to me was a very big plus for us.
Battery or power source major component? No. Those are consumable.
Nice
I would
try.
consider those consumable, just like a propeller.
And your registration sticker? No, that's not.
So now so if it's missing that part, and everybody, some people fly FR Sky, some people fly Crossfire, some people fly DJI, whatever the case may be. So that's the easiest component to leave off the list and have the user selected from a different part of the website to create a different line item. So yes, then what you would do is you could either leave the remote ID off and be relegated to a FRIA site if you wanted to go fly at a fixed flying site, or you could get a module to put onto the aircraft and be subject to standard or to module-based remote ID.
Josh, did you want to put out a teaser on the document you want to put out over the next couple of days?
Yeah, so all the information that actually I've been covering tonight came directly from the document that I'm creating. So I'm working on two different documents right now. Both of them are kind of in a midpoint. I would say one of them is kind of early point, and then the second one is very close to finished. But I did a bulleted summary of what is in here, and I broke it down into a little more forgiving language for everybody, so they didn't have to read all the nonsense legalese type of language. I will try to include links when I mention a different regulation or something like that into the document. But basically, it's just bulleted, easy to understand, breaks it down, bullet style. So, it's got all the different requirements for standard remote ID. It's got all the different requirements for broadcast, module based remote ID. It talks about FRIAs. It talks about registration. What's a home built aircraft? And it's even going to go into some of the more technical side of means of compliance for people or organizations that want to create like a standard remote ID aircraft or a module based aircraft, or a module remote ID module itself. And then the other document that I'm creating is actually an article just detailing from a higher level perspective remote ID, kind of what was in the NPRM, what our suggestions were, what got accepted, and what kind of got left on the cutting room floor. But that's kind of in the beginning stages. I am working on that. Keep in mind, I do have a day job, so give me a little bit. I do know that several organizations have come out with their own articles, but I will get this out as soon as I can, I promise.
And as a quick recap, there's really only a few things people need to know. First of all, dates. Nothing happens right away.
Yes.
Operators have until around September 2023 before we have to comply. And there are 3 ways to comply. One is buy a drone that is off the shelf and complies. 2 is add a module to your existing drone. 3 is fly at a designated flying site. And that's that's the important stuff people need to know.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Any other questions? I know people are leaving. I know it's getting late at night. I thank you all for joining us. I will hang around for a couple more minutes if anybody's got any questions. But thank you all. Please let us know if you have questions. Feel free to email us or hit us up on Discord or Facebook. But beyond that, I will hang out if anybody's got any more questions or comments. And beyond that, have a good night, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for showing up. Thanks for all the questions, everybody.